Ah, there we go.
Oh, here we go.
Hey, I think you're the wrong way. How's this happened?
All right. Okay, let me just turn it
Hello?
around
Yeah.
quickly. There you go. Okay, let me just adjust the stand quickly. Okay, I think that's fine. And the lighting,
Yeah, you look good. Let's see. Yeah, looks
right.
good. Looks good. I think I can see you. Have
Oh,
people.
hello.
Hey, nice to see ya.
Oh, lovely to see you, and thank you so much for these
It's
flowers.
so beautiful. I'm actually really jealous. I'm gonna get myself some flowers. I actually saw the picture you posted. I was like, oh my God, I want this now.
I should send you some, actually. Thank you so much. And I'm really grateful to you. I'm really grateful to Cassava Republic for this. And you have no idea how excited I am for this moment. Also because last year we kept building up to it and then COVID-19 interruption. So I'm really, really excited about it.
Yeah, I think last year was definitely just ooh, this is what's going on. You plan for something and then COVID was like, no, try again next year and but I mean it's great. We're here now. It's so great to have seen, so many people just like really excited for the book also on socials. And I'm glad that, people are just like, yes, a man who's not a man, because I'm like, everyone needs to read this. So I'm one of the lucky people who has this is us stalling while people join. So I have obviously new cover, but I also got this last year. So I got really excited last year before I joined the Cassava Republic team even. And I was like, I literally opened the first page and I was like, oh, okay, we're in for a wild ride. This is gonna be great. It's gonna be amazing, and it has been. So thank you so much for writing it.
No, thank you so much. I have this copy too, and oh my gosh, I'm so in love with it. Bibi and I really love the cover. I think when I was sent the options, we were just set on this one. This is the one. So I'm really happy to see it in physical form. And I mean, I can see the activity here. I mean, there's so many people that have joined in. So really, we're grateful for you to join us tonight.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. Yeah, so definitely do throw questions into the chat because I will be pulling from questions in the chat as we go on. We're gonna try and keep this to an hour, but are you okay if we go over? Because Instagram cuts us off after an hour, but we're gonna try and do it within the hour range. Because I know everyone's in different time zones. We have US people,
Yeah.
we have UK, we have Europe, we have South Africa, which is like I think the latest time zone. Sorry. I was like, I'm gonna keep you up late on your launch day so you can have like it can feel like a party, like a late night party in COVID for you.
No, that's fine. I'm fine with that as long as some people in South Africa are okay with that. It will transition nicely into a dreamy state, which is when I'm about to sleep. So it's cool. I'm all right with it.
Yeah, I think the worst things, or not, this is probably the best thing to consume before you go to sleep. I
Yeah,
mean, I think
for
at this
me
point,
especially.
yeah, and at this point, I think we've all watched everything on Netflix. So
No, this is true. But you know, one thing that I also wanted to say, maybe accounting for my excitement for this moment, is that I think we've really missed, substantial book events. We haven't had many book launches, in this past year up to now. We've had people, trying to not to keep the literary landscape afloat by organizing virtual literary festivals and so on. But I think we are now, succumbing to this current state of affairs, and I'm happy that we have a moment like this to launch a book. It may have felt a bit awkward if we tried to do it like in August last year, but now we're used to this kind of things.
Yeah, I think yeah, we're definitely, we've greased the wheels in 2020, so 2021 we can definitely be, well, I think everyone's a lot more comfortable just being virtual, but we know that the love's there, the excitement's there. Um, and I think one good thing about, Instagram Live is everyone can talk to each other in the comments, so people can have their own, separate discussions from us and have parties of their own. I've just seen from Books and Rhymes that Instagram has extended IG Live to 4 hours. We're obviously not going to be here for 4 hours,
Oh
but it
my
just means that
goodness.
it means that this can go on for slightly over an hour if we need to without being interrupted, which is fantastic. Okay, I think we're gonna officially, and I'm gonna do officially start. So welcome everyone to the A Man Who's Not a Man Live, which is launching the, A Man Who's Not a Man on a global scale. We're so excited to have Thando here with us, the fantastic author of this book. Hi Thando.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah, so thank you so much for joining us. And I think, we've already started speaking a bit about, pandemic and how it changed things last year. And I did ask you to sort of start the conversation with, something you've picked up in lockdown. So I know people picked up like knitting. I think I picked up more wine more than anything. But is there anything you picked up in lockdown that, has really been like, actually, I've loved doing this?
Lucky you, you were able to pick up some wine. Because in South Africa, we are presently in a state in which, alcohol is banned. So, there's no picking up of any wine. If the South Africans who are on the comment section are misbehaving, that's who they are. They are not drunk. Um, but for me, the one thing that I picked up is gardening, actually. So my house has a little yard at the back, and I'd always thought about, doing some gardening, being a boy who grew up in the villages, thinking about my grandmother that we lost in March last year, who had these green fingers, and I was always wanting to plant something, and there didn't seem to be time for it. But suddenly there was all this time to do all this work. So I planted some spinach, I planted some onions and carrot and cabbage. I don't know why I planted cabbage because I don't eat coleslaw. I don't eat cabbage in any form. But the exciting thing about this gardening project of mine was that I wanted to show my daughter that who's 4 years old now, that food comes from the soil. I wanted her to pick out a carrot and see that, oh, this is where it comes from. It doesn't come from Woolworths or Pick and Pay where we normally buy it, but you can actually plant your own food, and that's really been exciting. Um, she did disrupt my gardening process. She did pull out a few of those things.
As
And
4 year olds
when
would,
I
yeah.
asked her what happened to my gardening, she just shook her shoulders like, I don't know. So gardening definitely has been that. But also just cleaning my house. I think, we get up and we go to work and we don't pay until we hire people to do that work for us. But now when you have to do it yourself, it takes half a day. And you are sweating and you have to scrub everything. And then you have to do it every week. So, I've just been getting into the groove of that. But gardening definitely is what I've picked up, and I want to continue with that.
That sounds fantastic. I wish, I had the patience to actually garden, but also it's always raining in England, so yeah, it's not for me. But that sounds so good because I think, one thing that's been really, really important, is understanding how we nourish our bodies, or we've had time to think about it. Because you
Yeah.
said, you go to work, you come back, you're like, oh, this is here, or I'll just pick this up on the way. Where, being in lockdown was like, oh, I have to make all my meals, or I have to think about all my meals, and and so that's really fantastic. How's that going? So what's sprouted? What have you seen come up? Everything,
So,
or
I mean, the spinach was like the Beyonce of the garden because it was like shooting up ahead of everything else. So I had to eat the spinach early. I promised a few people that they could come and harvest, and that didn't happen. Um, I ended up giving the rest of the spinach to the guy that helps me with cutting the grass here, and then. you know, the cabbage is still coming up, and I'm like, this is so boring. Like, it's like it has no intentions of becoming anything useful. The carrots I picked up, I love the spring onion more than anything. So I've cleaned up half of the garden now, and I'm gonna try out tomatoes, and see how that goes. But what you should know about Cape Town is that this place that we live in used to be the ocean. So it is the soil here is the sand. So it is
Oh,
not ideal for planting anything. You know, it's just white sand. So if anyone in Cape Town tells you they are planting something, you're like, in sand.
okay. See, that's made the story even more fantastic because you've managed to make things grow in places they're not supposed to grow. Which okay, magic. Also, why are we not seeing? I feel like you should be tweeting more about this. I want to see. I want to see all your veg
No,
come up
you
on
are
social
late.
media.
You are late. I was like Instagramming my spinach, putting it out there, calling it the Beyonce. Maybe one other thing that I did talk about, which has been really great, is running. I probably don't look like it now, but running has really been amazing. And what's really important, it's like a form of meditation because this is where all the creative thinking is happening. To a point that I can't wait to get home to put down all the ideas before I take a shower. Um, so there's been all of these amazing things that one could pick up, but you know, this is overshadowed by the anxiety and all of the news about death and all of that. But maybe driving this conversation towards a man who's not a man, one of the anxieties that I had was that um, in South Africa, especially in the Eastern Cape province, where the majority of the Xhosa people live, and where the ritual of traditional male circumcision is practiced, the month of June and July, and then December and January are the seasons for traditional male circumcision, seasons at which this ritual is practiced. And what we are used to over the last 20 years or so is seeing news reports of young men like Lumkile in the book reported to have died or to have lost their limbs, to be amputated, to be traumatized in their dozens. And my anxiety was that in this COVID time, where it's probably, if you've read the book, you would know that it's probably impossible to practice any kind of physical distancing because the initiate needs to be helped by, you know, an aftercare attendant who has to go to the community to make contact with the community. So I was like, this is traumatic. This is giving me like anxiety because it means there's going to be a lot of sickness and possible death. Fortunately, the South African government banned I don't want to say banned, but you know, it just said there should be no traditional method circumcision practiced in June. And then again, as we were building up, you know, towards December, with the regulations being relaxed, they uplifted the ban and said people could circumcise in certain places. I was like, oh my God, we're heading for the second wave. And what's been curious that I want to follow up on actually is to look at the number of initiates who may have suffered the fate of those, you know, who died and got amputated in the past, because it was not, curiously, it was not reported this time. Maybe because you know, there is this hyper reporting of COVID-19 and things like that, and parties and all of these, and it was not paid attention to. And I'm worried about what we may not know but could have happened without us watching.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic place to bring us to the idea of, you know, what we don't know because it's not told. Um, and I'll say for myself, as reading A Man Who's Not a Man, I think I thought very abstractly about male circumcision as something that, you know, boys get circumcised and that's it. And it's just something that you think about like, this is so normal. And, you know, I read this and I thought, actually, why have we just accepted this as normative? And also, what are the different ways circumcision is practiced? And I think it's also that sometimes we think of one thing as, you know, singular, as this is the only way a thing is done, where there's so many different practices of the same thing, and what are those stories? So I just want to ask, so in writing, you know, A Man Who's Not a Man, like obviously this was written 10 years ago, and, you know, it's getting second, you know, life, and it's a slightly
Yeah.
re-edited version of the initial. What were your hopes when you initially wrote it, and what are your hopes now, you know, that you're bringing it to life again?
So, I mean, this is really exciting for me because, I mean, I think most of the people who are watching here are readers or writers and publishers, and we know that, you know, the life of an ordinary book is that you get published this year, there's some excitement. The following year, you are invited to all the literary festivals, you're celebrated, you are shortlisted for awards. And then the following year, it starts to die down, and you need to think about your next manuscript. But in 5 years, if you haven't produced anything, it's referred to, you know, it's had its lifetime. Unless, you know, some event happens that brings back the book to life, to a point that a lot of people, a lot of writers may have died thinking that their books failed, which were, you know, later resuscitated by certain political or social events. But
Yeah.
this book, for me, the journey of this book has been quite surprising. I mean, you hope your book is gonna have this life that is everlasting, that it will forever be relevant. But that's what happened with it. It's been taught at universities, it's been used for research, it's been taught outside of the borders of South Africa for quite a long time before Cassava Republic picked it up. Um, and I don't know if I should now arrogantly think that, well, maybe it's starting or beginning to, you know, occupy its rightful place in the pantheon of the literary canon in the world. But I'm really, really excited for the book to go out there. And I think the other element to it is that in terms of African literature, it's been really exciting to watch Nigerians flying, you know, from Chimamanda, Chinelo, Barata, everybody, you know, once they launch their debut book, it's out there, it's in the world. The same is true about some Zimbabwean writers. But South Africa, after Godima and James Kutia, we've been very provincial. You know, you launch a book and it's big success here, and that's the end of it. There's only a select few that, you know, that make it into the world. And even when they do this, published by some small press somewhere in the USA, and you never hear about it. You hear that a person has got 5 to 6 translations, but where is the book? Why is no one talking about it? And what I'm hoping will happen with A Man Who's Not a Man is that it will open the way to the mainstream global literary platform for South African writers in the way that it is happening for Nigerian, some Kenyan, and Zimbabwean writers in particular. So that's what I'm hoping, and I was genuinely surprised when the book year after year, you know, kept being relevant, kept being spoken about, to a point that when we were celebrating its 10th anniversary, we had someone, Professor Dinyuko Maluleke, doing a 10th anniversary review of the book. I was like, what? This happens? So I feel incredibly lucky on the one hand, but maybe I should take some credit and say that I knew that I was picking up a really big subject, and um, which is still quite a controversial matter. And I knew that it was going to be, because, you know, this is a cultural matter, it was going to be relevant for a while. I just didn't know that, you know, the book would play such a central role in appraising the culture and thinking about the culture in the discourse.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, for writing, you put something there and you think, you know, I have these hopes for it, but I think A Man Who's Not a Man has managed to maybe even exceed, you know, the hopes for it because of the space it's been able to be in. So it's in academic spaces and personal spaces. But I think that's just a testament to the timelessness, I feel, of the narrative is this story about, you know, something that's old and traditional. It's older than us, the readers, you know.
Yeah.
And because of that, you know, that sort of groundedness in history, it's sort of like, how do I understand this? Can this be something that's changed? And, you know, and what ways can it be changed? What are we looking to change? This book, just, you have so many questions you want to ask. You're like, how do I feel
Yeah.
about the topic? Is it, you know, is the practice bad, or was this person's situation bad? Or and you're sort of, you know, you're thinking so vastly and widely, and your brain's doing so many things. So I think there isn't a time that a person is going to read this book. There's not a time you're going to say, I picked up a man who's not a man, and I think, you know what, that's been great, that's been good. I think I can read it next year and be like, actually, I'm thinking about it from this perspective now. Like, I want to actually know
Yeah.
grandfather's story, or let's think more about Yanda and, you know, what her experiences were and why she
Yeah.
reacted the way she did. So yeah, just, I think this book is timeless, and it has so many different questions it's asking. Stepping back from my praise, you know, you talk about, you know, not being wholly sure where this would go. Why though did you, because this topic, you said, is very particular, it's very controversial, you know, it's something that maybe some people might not even want to talk about in the public space.
Yeah.
So why did you particularly pick this topic, and why did you choose to explore it in the way that you did in A Man Who's Not a Man?
Yeah. So I thought about that question just before the session, actually. So I may have answered it elsewhere before and told some lie. So this is the latest lie that I'm gonna tell about
Okay.
it. So so at the time, there were two things that were happening. You know, I had just completed my undergrad, pursuing my postgrad, and I was also an intern at the Human Sciences Research Council. You know, when we were writing a book about the profession of nursing. So at work, I was doing research and writing, and then at home, I had told myself that I'm into this writing thing, and what I promised myself in 2008 is that at the end of the year, I want to have a publishable manuscript. I understood at that point already that not everything that you write will or should be published, but I want to have a manuscript that you know, by the end, that is publishable. So by April of that year, I had written about 2 other manuscripts that I've never looked at again because
Wow.
because they were so rushed and they were so disorganized. I'll probably go back to that when I'm like 60 or something like that. And then this subject that I had tried to write about before, like 2 years before, came back, and I said, okay, so this is the one. And how about we tackle it as a kind of a confession? This young man is sick of hiding, and he wants to put it all out there to kind of exercise himself. So the narrative structure will be that of a memoir, which is why we had like a prologue and an epilogue. And we follow his time at the mountain, and he has a point to make that I didn't do anything wrong. I followed every procedure. These people kept saying the initiates who are dying are over there, but it happens to us as well. And even though I had done everything, you know, so he had this point. A lot of people who read the book, they're like, oh, this narrator is very sensitive. And he is, you know, that's by design. So I wrote the book, and I said, okay, this is the one. That's the one I'm going to publishers with. And that's the one thing that I want to say. But also assessing society, there was some talk that was happening about traditional male circumcision in South African society at the time. So there were some academics who were writing papers on it. I remember Thembinkosi Goni and Phumlo Dinao did some work. I remember that there was Andile Mutama who was writing opinion pieces to the newspapers every circumcision when, you know, there are these statistics coming up of these fatalities, and he was an abolitionist. He was advocating for the abolition of the whole thing. And a few years before that, there had been a controversial drama series that treated the subject on television, and I knew that I'm touching a sensitive subject here, but I felt like it wasn't dealt with in a comprehensive way, and in a comprehensive way that is not subjective, that is not pushing a particular agenda, but that just presents it as it is, so that a lot of people oppose the book thinking that it's against traditional male circumcision. Some people think that it is for traditional male circumcision, and it is neither. It is neither of those things. So I wanted to find this middle ground that will have you asking all the relevant questions. Questions like, how relevant is um, this way in which we seek to socialize young boys, young Xhosa boys into adulthood today? Because it was previously, in the absence of education, in the absence of schooling, this was the way in which young people were being socialized into responsible members of society. But how relevant is it today in the way that it is, when we are not paying as much attention as we did in the past? And Lumkile would be a case in point. If his grandfather had just paid enough attention, if his uncle maybe had just paid enough attention, maybe things wouldn't have turned out the way that they did. So I wanted to ask different soberer questions, and I wanted to go for popular media because there's a way in which a film cannot capture some of what is captured here, and there's a way in which an opinion piece cannot capture what is captured in a novel, because a novel is about a whole life, which maybe brings me to the next point, Nikki, which is that um, it isn't really a book about circumcision either. So
No.
this traditional circumcision is the canvas in which life happens. This is a moment in his life. He had a life before in Cape Town, uh, you know,
Having fun, playing
hooking
with his
up with,
friends. Yeah.
yes. And then afterwards, I mean, he fell in love. There's a love story involved. And then there is the life that he has afterwards where, he wants to go to university, he's determined and so on. So anybody, anywhere in the world, even or especially those who don't know anything about traditional male circumcision as practiced by Amaxhosa, will still find a lot of relevance here, because this eventually is a life of a young man, a troubled life of a young man. So I knew that there's going to be circumcision, but there's a story that I want to tell. And something, maybe the last point, because I feel like I'm blabbering on and on now, is that
Okay.
I felt like, because I was reading a lot, and a lot of the contemporary work that was coming out was based in the city,
Yeah.
right? Either in Johannesburg or Cape Town. Everybody's referring to the same Mandela Bridge kind of thing. And I wanted to write about village life in an authentic way. Um, and that's where it gets biographical for me, because I grew up in a village, so that was easy for me. So I wanted to write a village novel in the way that Achebe does a village novel, for example, in Arrow of God. I wanted to do a village novel in the way that someone like Loretta Ngobo did a village novel in And They Didn't Die in South Africa. So there were many things that I wanted to do, and I thought the time is just right. There is probably cost and danger involved, but no one is going to kill me for it.
No, just doing a pause, looking through sort of the messages going, and someone's asked, can we get another live when more people have had a chance to read the book? Definitely. We're going to do a book club with Thando later in the year, so you can come and ask him all your questions, vent all your frustrations at Thando. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, so we'll be doing this probably on Zoom or live, but we'll definitely be hosting something again. So one thing you did mention, so A Man Who's Not a Man is not just a story about male circumcision. It's just we use the male circumcision to get you there, and then you fall in love with everything else. Now, you do mention that you wanted to write about village life, and it's very notable that you write about this, and I'm going to use, the Western terms, this working class space, this very, native space where people are living, lives that feel or, simpler and more grained in tradition in a different way than if it was set in, a Cape Town or city. Beyond, not wanting to just, give people sort of the same sort of visual of South Africa and telling the story, why do you think it was important, or what do you think people respond to when they read the story from the perspective of Lungile and his community, which is, not a centralized, glossy Cape Town? Or do you think, so I don't know if I'm asking this properly. Yeah.
No, I think I get your question. And the context, to it is that, in fact, this affects all Black people in the world. All Black people in the world have got at least two homes. There's the home where you are, where you work in the city, and then there's the home that you go to. Whether we're talking about someone who's based in Cape Town, where they're getting their education and they work, and then they go to the village like Blumkile did, or we're talking about a Nigerian or Ghanaian who is based in the United States but has to go home, in their respective country. I remember Barack Obama in his second book, Dreams from My Father, talking about traveling from the United States to the country of his father, Kenya, and then when he gets there, they're still going home elsewhere in the village. So there was home and home, and I knew that this is a global Black phenomenon. This can be traced to slavery and the way white people have been pushing us to the periphery of society in general. And then in the South African context, a lot of the literature was about, going to the city of gold, which is Johannesburg, going to the city to find this life, or when things are not working out in the city, and so on. And if people go back to the village, they go to die. It was also my reality in the village that people were coming back, older people who had gone to work in Joburg and Cape Town were coming back literally to die in the villages. Or it would be somebody who at the time infected with HIV and is living with AIDS, and when their situation is really deteriorated, they're just whisked away from the city life, from city society, and then they go and wait for their death in the village. And I felt like the village life, the working class life, the village life we were treated as redundant citizens. We're always the last to be thought about. I think Lumkile reflects to this when he's waiting for nurses to come visit him. It's like, oh, they'll probably start in the townships, and we are always considered last. And this is true. But what I wanted to do with the book, I wanted to turn it around, because Lumkile is arrested in Cape Town. He's into drugs, and he's anxious that he's either going to die or end up in Posmo prison, and he doesn't want this to happen. Luckily, his mom comes at the right time, and this is where he goes to learn humanness anew in the village. He talks about appreciating the landscape, something that he hadn't had time to pause and think about in the city, falling in love properly, making friendships. Now he's paying attention to his education, even though this was the worst school you could think of. But I wanted to talk about the existence of a vibrant life, even in a situation like that. And that we were no longer in the era in which exciting, vibrant life was only possible in the city. And this is true even if you blow it up now and talk about our brothers and sisters going for greener pastures elsewhere in other continents, as though there are no opportunities here in the African continent. So I wanted to just twist this around, and I'm hoping that it can be used that way, it can be read that way, to give the village people like me a voice.
Oh yeah, that's fantastic. And I think, in the context to talk about, people leaving, countries for greener pastures, like in the West, we're sort of seeing this thing where people are now returning home, you know, one like the return home that Ghana does, you know, the homecoming, but
Yes,
also
yes,
in terms of people wanting to, you know, suddenly, you know, I want to now go back and learn my language or learn about traditional spirituality or different things. So there is, I think, you know, a change in terms of people not just returning home to die, it's, you know, returning home for as a rebirth also, like Limkele, you know,
mm,
returning home
mm,
is you get a chance to start all over again, you get a chance for your future to not just be prison, because that's where he was, you know, headed. And I think, you know, we see 10 years later, since the book being released, that story of the, you know, coming back home as coming to be reborn into, you know, another version of yourself, a stronger version of yourself. And you don't have to have, again, the best facilities. It's about, you know, what's the community look like? How do your values change? How does your thought process, you know, change? And
yeah.
I think those are sometimes the biggest things, because you know, you can come out of any situation and be great. Yes, it would be nice to have, you know, facilities, but I think you can be made wherever you set your mind to be made, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no,
Um,
that does definitely make sense. I mean, there are other characters. So Yanda is in the same situation. You know, she's had her own life in Cape Town as well. I mean, I don't know why I was victimizing Cape Town people so much. Maybe because that's what I was familiar with. But so I wanted to say that it's not just him, there are others as well. And the expression in the book is learning humanness afresh, picking up these fundamental values that have nothing to do with noise and speed and all of this that we're chasing in the cities. Um, and I think there's a part of your question that I forgot to deal with, which is how it was received. I mean, uh, people with village connections, which is the majority of Black people in South Africa, really appreciate this because this talks about home, whether it is their grandmother's home, where they go for a week or two in December, but it reflects this. So there was an appreciation for that. Um, but maybe talking about how the book was received here, which was kind of disappointing for me because it wasn't really treated as a literary piece. It was this controversial book about circumcision. So everyone wanted to talk about this subject. And then I was like, how about my writing style, though? I mean, did you think about the head people?
which I
Did you
think,
think
yeah,
about...
that's the one thing I want to come to. The writing of this is it's fantastic. It's brilliant because what you do is, this is it's a very realist novel. We read this and I think I'm situated in, I moved from city to village and I feel that movement. But you weaving sort of this poetic narrative because we have we have the local languages embedded in it, but we also have the narrative voice, which is sensitive. So, it's not just, I'm a gruff man. It's this is my emotional space I'm experiencing this through. This is how my physical is affecting, my spiritual, my emotional. But then we have, again, this narrative voice. So we have that oral tradition in there. So I'm just,
Yeah.
when putting this novel together, what did you draw from to really give us something that's so rich? And, it is a literary novel, not just a story. What were you pulling from when thinking about how to craft the novel?
I mean, I was definitely pulling from the oral culture, from my own upbringing, from my own experience. Um, I remember I remember when I was talking about I'm trying to think now. I mean, it's been 10 years, so I've forgotten some parts. But I remember, like a conversation between chickens in the novel. I think it's chapter 20 something. A conversation between chickens. And this is a story that my mother used to tell me that when the cock crows in the morning, they're actually having a conversation. And this is the content of the conversation. They was like, what? So when I was writing the book, I'm weaving this in and but also like it was also coming from my reading. So one of the things that I wanted to do is I wanted to separate certain parts of the body and actually make them characters, and that includes the mind. So the mind would be the head people. So I couldn't just say, oh, this is what I thought. I would say the head people were thinking this. You give some respect to the head people, or the chess people were pulling to a different direction. And I wanted to do the same thing with the penis. I was like, I'm gonna write a novel in which the penis appears in every page, and it's not cringeworthy. Right? Like it's not a controversial thing. The penis is wounded, it's healing, it's in need of healing, but it also represents something else metaphorically. So I'm gonna treat this. It was a challenge for me, and I was like, I think I can do this. I know a way of talking about these things without being overly explicit, without revealing too much. So really, I was drawing both from my reading and the oral culture. One thing that I should mention about the head people in particular, later on, I would read Roberto Bolano, who is my favorite Chilean writer, talking about the heart as the wizened youth. I was like, who comes up with that? And I can't remember before writing A Man Who's Not a Man who was talking about the mind as the executive or the council. Lauren Hill talks about the people in my head. So I was drawing from this culture that already exists and putting it in a novel. And it worked beautifully for me. I mean, I think it's kind of confusing initially, like the head people, what are you talking about? But once you get into it, what I find is that once a person has read A Man Who Is Not a Man, they speak the language of a man who's not a man afterwards. You know, my sister was sending me a message a few days ago, and she wants to say she misses me. She's like, my chest people are longing for you.
Oh, I'm going to use that. I love that. Oh, no, that's fantastic. And I think, I think part of what, A Man Who's Not a Man does, it gives us, because it gives us language for certain things we don't know how to say. Because, you think that there's voices in my head, but I never think call them the head people. And it might, because sometimes the voices are different. We always have these warring voices in our head, that tell you you're fantastic or you're not so great, you're happy, you're sad. And I think there's a Pixar movie that sort of plays around with this concept of people in your head controlling your emotions. And I can't remember the name now, unfortunately, because it's fantastic. And it's just a way of explaining emotions to children. But I watched it and I was like, oh, thank you, I needed this. But I think, the idea of, our bodies, parts of our bodies are different cells. You hear stories of people that have like phantom limb syndrome, or where they think, a limb on their body doesn't belong to them. And you're like, this is so interesting, because how can you wake up one day and say, this is not my hand and it needs to go? And then they have those, limbs amputated and they feel better. And you're like, this is an interesting concept. Terrifying, but interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they still feel fun. Even after the amputation, a person can still feel phantom pain. So a person without a foot can feel pain in their foot, and how do you communicate this? So I really wanted to write a novel about the body, and it was going to be the male body mostly. But what I also did, which I think might be controversial, especially to readers who are not familiar with South Africa, who are not Xhosa, for example, I also use the body to describe the landscape. So, for example, when I'm talking about the Oxtral Dam, I'm talking about the Oxtral bladder, and this bladder was going to menstruate us all the way to Queenstown. And then there's a reference to the mountain boobs, which I think is going to be a big one. But maybe let me just clarify it right now. So in the part of the country that used to be called the Transkei, there is a city called Xhosa. And in Xhosa, there are these twin mountains that are standing alongside each other, and they're called Amabele Ntombi, which is a girl's breasts. And this is not sexualized, because our bodies in our cultures are not always sexualized. So I took that and I used it in the novel, because it was a novel that is concerned with the body, but I was going to deal mostly with the male body. So even when you think about the stick, the knobkiri, it's supposed to be your penis that you're shaking another man's hand with, and it's like I was interested in dealing with the mechanisms of the human body as a metaphor for something else. I also wanted to talk about I also wanted to talk about a man who hasn't had sex,
Yeah.
who is afraid of it, because virginity, when we talk about virginity, it's like something that's exclusive to young women, to girls, but we never really talk about the virginity of young men. So he's here, he's like, I hadn't parted ways with my innocence yet. And I mean, my penis was wounded now. What am I supposed to do? Do it here in public? No, thank you very much. So, I was really interested, in talking about those things, but I'm also interested in a young man who was going to reject some of what is accepted about manhood in his culture that he considers ill-fitting to his character. So, for example, in the House of the Lamb, where he's supposed to be allocated a girl, he's like, no, like, I'm not going to do this. I mean, he probably has his sights on Yanda, who is not there. But by that time in the book that he's not the kind of person who would accept something like that just because it is prescribed by his culture. So I suppose that's me pushing back on the culture, but in the realest and most gentle way possible that can have you thinking and reflecting once you read the book.
Oh, that's wonderful. Just gonna pause and remind people you can throw questions in for Thando into the chat because we're gonna be putting from those soon. So if you have a question, just at Cassava Republic Press and pop that question through and I'll ask Thando. I think one thing we've spoken about, we need to confront the penis, and you talk about you write about it, and it's something that's repeated over and over again in the book, but it's not vulgar, it's not sexual. I think I think there was even sort of some concerns with promoting the book because I was like, let's just talk about the penis, let's go for it. And I think because having read the book, I was like, this is not, it's not always just a thing of a sexual organ. Like, it is, but it
Yeah.
represents so much. It's personhood. It's a thing to do with your health. Also, it represents culture, country, it represents self. And I just wonder though, why do we? Yes, it represents these things, but why do you think it's still such a marker of manhood? Why do you think people like the penis and manhood? Why do you think those are the most immediate connections rather than the penis as personal? Why is it this public thing still, do you think?
Oh, this is a difficult question. I think a part of it has to do with our history. So because we were colonized, and colonization meant the erosion of a lot of our culture, our way of being. So we were taught to adopt certain other ways of being. And we managed to hold on to a few of these cultural practices. And we feel most authentic when, we go through these rites of passages, when we practice these rituals and so on. And I think because the penis had been associated with manhood in that time, there was no sense of evolution, I think, in our headspace to say it does not need to mean what it used to before. Because all we are concerned about is to hold on to what's left from what's been eroded by colonization, which is why actually there is still a practice of traditional male circumcision among Xhosa, even though there's so much death, there's so much trauma and so on. We hold on to this because this is what we know about ourselves, and this is one of the few things we could hold on to. And I do not know how much trauma, how much death it's going to take for us to rethink this. To rethink it to a level where the penis does not mean manhood, anymore. But I mean, this is not something that is particular to Xhosa or people who practice this ritual. It's something that is universal, um, and it's applicable on in both sides. You know, if you're a woman, your vagina kind of defines your womanhood. What you do with your vagina defines your personhood. You know, what you do with your penis, who you have sex with your penis defines whether or not you are a real man, and so on. I really do not know where it comes from. And maybe I should just share a little joke with you. One of the things that I didn't know as a budding novelist then is that if you write about a subject, there was an expectation in society that you are the expert, you know everything about this. So I got called to conferences on masculinity and gender, and this is like, I don't know much about this. And also, I've made my contribution. Can you please take
My
this and
God.
analyze it?
I feel like anytime anyone calls for conference, just be like, so this, like, listen to me, I am this, let's go. I
Yeah,
think it's quite interesting. People fall into that trap, don't they? Of saying, "Oh, this person's written on this. They must." I think the expectation is one, you've done so much research that you just think I'm so
yeah,
knowledgeable. But I think it's also testament to how well you've written on the topic. So it's flattery, I
yeah.
guess, in a sense, that you've done it really, really well. Um,
No, thank you.
yeah. So I think final question before I throw it out to the crowd is, this book, Man Who Is Not a Man, is about men. In a sense of what the community of men looks like. So because Lumkile moves from one community of friendship, with Killer and I forget their names,
And
uh,
voice.
and Voice. There we go. And then he moves to the rural village community, and then he's sort of now surrounded by uncles and grandfather, and it's his mother's village, but he gets very much taken into that, and that I want to be part of the men's space. When thinking about writing these different men, because there's so many different men, there's so many different
Yeah.
representations of these men, and particularly, as South African men, what were you thinking? Okay, what kind of stories of manhood do I want to tell, and how were you able to tell such different strains of manhood? Because we have sensitive men, we have overly aggressive men, we have soft but strong men, but we have strong but so, do you know what I mean? Like the representations are so varied. So what was your thought process in approaching this, and what kind of stories about manhood were you trying to tell?
So, I mean, at the time, I was a fresh postgrad, so all the theory was with me. I was aware of something called hegemonic masculinity, and it was masculinity that is violent, that is all about power and dominance. Um, and when I thought about myself, I was like, um, I'm a beneficiary of this, and but I don't necessarily subscribe to some of these values. I don't want to dominate anybody. With I was raised by women mostly, and I was raised with girls around me, and there was no point in my life when I wanted to dominate, or think of myself as bigger or higher than them, at any point. Actually, one of the things that I was cringing about when I was coming out of my own ritual of circumcision was that, so now there's a respectful way in which younger people must address me. And I was like, oh my gosh, so now my little sister must call me Booty, and it feels so wrong. I don't want this. I don't want this weight on her. So I wanted to explore what else is possible in masculinity, because it can't all be about this dominance and this power and all of that. Um, so I selected, some figures like Oom who comes when he's in trouble. And unlike, if you juxtapose him with grandfather who's angry that you are putting our culture and my home into disrepute, Umden is gentler, understands. He even says, "You probably took too long. Maybe you should have called us earlier. Some things are dangerous. You just have to make a decision." I take someone like Uncle, who is this, alpha male, about power and all of this, and juxtapose this with someone like Dayongs, who comes later, who gives us the title of the book actually later on, A Man Who's Not a Man, who says, well, I thought I knew a man when I see one. Um, who's understanding, even though Lumkile is supposed to be shamed now because he's left his heart, abandoned his heart, and went for medical care. So, like, he is nobody. He's not a boy, he's not a man, he's not a woman, he's nobody. He must just disappear. But you've got someone like Dayongs who acknowledges his humanity in its fullness. And I wanted to say this is possible in masculinity. Um, and then, we have a character like Rain, who is quite scary. He goes there and he's banging everywhere. But once he's been appraised with what's really going on, he's like, well, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but you need to do it fast. So I wanted to say that, positive masculinities are possible. And this is probably what we should cultivate in society. This is what we should spend time cultivating in society. There's nothing that women and feminists haven't done to try and undo patriarchy. And I think that it's incumbent on us as men to work on ourselves. Feminism can go so far in pushing back and crushing patriarchy, but some of us men on the other side who are beneficiaries of this thing have to do something about it. And I thought a book like this could raise conversations like that, that a Lumkile is possible, a Dayongs is possible, a Womden is possible, even in a context where this literally the school of hegemonic masculinity, the ritual of circumcision is supposed to be. But people like that are possible in those contexts too. Yeah, I think I've forgotten the question now also.
And I was, writing about, different types, I guess, of masculinity or different types of men and telling different stories. I think, yeah, you really touched on it. And I guess I wonder how much you get from the people around you in telling these stories.
I mean, I also wanted to say, before I come to this question, I also wanted to say, I also take someone like Nurse Yazi, you're in the hospital, who is like, an agent of patriarchy, to say that you don't have to be a man to perpetuate patriarchy, right? But because it's an established system, it has recruited, women to the other side to become agents of patriarchy, sometimes unconsciously even. So, I use Nesiazio for this purpose, juxtaposed with the beautiful nightness that is so caring and so warm and so on. And this is the only time that I cried when I was writing the book. Actually, I was like, oh, she's so sweet. Oh my gosh. I cried with the character. Because I mean, she just does it so gently, like she just touches the hand and says, take care of yourself. And you don't expect, well, Lumkile does not expect to be treated with kindness by anyone. And so when it comes, it's a shock to him. But I wanted to say that those kind of things are possible. Well, around me, nobody has come to me personally, but in the age of Twitter, I've been called all sorts of things. Actually, let me tell you something. So in the beginning of lockdown, when there was, we're talking about COVID-19, I tweeted something about the statistics that was going up, and someone commented and said, well, if you don't withdraw your book, we hope COVID-19 takes you too. And I was like, oh my God, like, seriously, I screenshotted it. I was like, this is horrible. This is not something you could wish on. Like you can't say this even in a jest, not in a time of death like this.
But also,
But
perhaps read the book first, you know? Oh my God.
so I mean, someone said that. But the point I was going to make is that nobody has had, I suppose, the courage to come to me and say they disagree with me having written about this subject, but they will say it to my friends. It will come somehow, but never directly. Um, where there was a lot of pushback is when um, a movie came out called Inxeba, The Wound in 2018, which is not an adaptation of this book at all. The only thing that's common between the two artifacts is that they're written by the same person and they use the same subject of traditional male circumcision as a canvas, really. So when the movie came out, and it was this sellout Thando again who'd written about this subject again. So I mean, I'm kind of written off as a man or anything in some quarters, but I'm okay with it. Um, I do wonder though, my daughter is turning 5 this year, and I'm like, so what kind of life is she going to have, if a father who has this kind of reputation? Um, and what is she going to think when she reads the book? Um, but aside from those concerns, there has been an overwhelming sense of appreciation for this book, particularly by Black women. Because first of all, what happens at the mountain is supposed to stay at the mountain.
Yeah.
So now, you get to get a fuller perspective. But what is also happening, Nikki, that I must tell you, and you must be aware of this because it's going to be part of your journey as well, is that every year, almost every month, I get an inbox on my Facebook from a young man who says, "Oh my goodness, I just read this book, and if you just change the names, this is my story. Thank you." Or somebody who says, this year, a young man in a university here in Cape Town wrote to me in the middle of lockdown and said he had heard about this book and this was his story and he would love to read it. I immediately called an Uber, put a copy of the book and sent it to him because he said it was going to save his life. So, I mean, it's a novel that also does that kind of work. The first time that I launched the book, I got this very long text message from a mother who said, um, she said her son had committed suicide after coming out from the mountain. And she didn't know why. She knew, she heard that there was some trouble and she was not allowed to know what was happening. But when he came out, he immediately committed suicide. And now, having read this book, she was beginning to understand what he may have gone through. She was beginning to understand how he may have come to a decision like that. So, whilst on the one hand, you have this noise, the pushback, there's been a general appreciation of the book. And it's been taught in curious disciplines as well, not just in literature, but sociology, African studies, and all sorts of things that I've never imagined in my life.
Oh, yeah, I think, so many different powerful stories in terms of response, some aggressively bad, but I think it's the story of the mother being able to understand her son who's no longer here through your book. I think that's just, that must have just been something for you because you're telling someone's story beyond, their existence on Earth, and that's just fantastic. I think this is a great place to ask you if you can just read us a little section from the book. So I'm going to give you like a quick minute to pull something out, something you want to read for us. In the meantime, please, yeah, if you have any questions, do pop them in. I see someone says I didn't introduce myself. I'm so sorry. I was just so excited to speak to Thando. I just jumped in the conversation. And I'm also not used to speaking to people because I barely talk at home. But I'm Nikki Igbarola. So I'm the Talent Audience Development Manager at Cassava Republic Press. I'm very new here. So thank you so much for joining the live. So great to have you guys here and see you guys, in conversation in the comment section. And are you ready for us, Thando? Just give us a little read of
Yes, I
Manhood.
am. Yes, thank you so much. I think I'm going to read a short um, paragraph from the beginning.
Okay.
Okay, so here we go. This story is about how I came to have an abnormal penis. So there you have it. My genitalia is not the normal type. By that I mean it hasn't got the distinctive lollipop shape with a knobbly head that most men boast of. Let me say that's not because I was born this way. When I was a boy, the potential and everything was there. There are no funny stories related about me at birth. Some boys get told their willies were so small, their mothers gave them girls' names. Me, I was a real boy from the get-go, with both my balls fully descended and the promising look that I would one day own a formidable loin. But Satan had other plans. Have you ever wondered what happens to Abaqueta whose circumcision fails at the bush? You have seen their sorrowful white-smeared faces and bulgy bloodshot eyes. You have seen their ugly shaven heads weighed down with shame and disappointment. I'm talking about the young Xhosa boys whose misfortune affords them the costly opportunity to grab news headlines. If you belong to the 0.001% of South Africans who have not heard about or seen these boys, I suggest you consult your nearest media house. The Eastern Cape's Daily Dispatch must hold the record for such stories on its archived front pages. Call up the first thing tomorrow and write your thesis on it. You may want to formulate your hypothesis according to the following questions. Who exactly are these miscreants whose circumcision fails? What type of people were they before they were circumcised? What happens to them at the mountains? Who do they become afterwards? That's an important one. Who do they become? And then he goes on to say, well, I'm here. You don't need to go and buy the newspaper. You don't need to write the dissertation. I'm here. I'm gonna
I'll
break
tell
it down
you.
to you.
um,
Um,
yeah,
maybe
it's
maybe
such a
what I
great
should
opening. You want to keep going?
maybe what I should say what I should say is that Nikki, just revealing. So the part that I've just read now is what used to be the epilogue in the early editions of the book, and then you go to chapter one, and that's not the chronology with which I wrote the book. I started with chapter one, where he's like looking down and is identifying everyone by their shoes, how shiny the shoes are, and so on. And then I was like, no, the story hasn't begun. Um, and what I was thinking here is that you have a responsibility as a storyteller before you mesmerize us with your great novel to grab our attention first. You are essentially inviting me to put down my phone, to switch off my TV, to not go to a friend and sit here with a book. And that's what the opening scene is supposed to be about. So I know for some people it sounds like overly dramatic, and that's intentional. Especially in this time, I mean, we are always on our phones. You can just watch a movie on your phone or do anything. But to get a book that grabs your attention, that says, hang on, sit down, put everything down, sit down, let me tell you a story. I was kind of anticipating with the advent of the internet that there's going to be that kind of challenge. And this is why I went back and wrote the prologue, and it worked with the plan of writing it as a memoir, Lumkile's memoir.
Yeah, I think, yeah, this is one of those openings. So I have a thing for the openings of books, and one of my favorites, like Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God, because I just think
Yes.
I open it and I think, oh my God, what's going on here? And it pulls you. And this, I remember opening the first page because it, the proof landed in my house. I thought, oh, a man's not a man. I opened it. I went, okay, this is an opening. I'm hooked. You pulled me in. I want to know everything. Let's go. I think it's one of those ones that's definitely going to stay with people for some time because it's a story of a man opening up himself.
Yeah.
To you as a reader, it feels like someone's inviting you to their innermost self, which is not the expectations for masculinity in so many different cultures, and not just for Black persons, for different people across the world. And by doing that, by opening the book in this very memoir style, where it's just come in and see who I am. I'm going to turn myself inside out for you, but softly, and I think this verse, a man who's not a man. I think anyone who opens this and says, I'm going to start this journey is going to be so happy, just from the opening. But I mean, obviously finish the book, but you read the first section and you're like, oh, I'm blessed, I'm great. I'm just looking through the chat. I don't think there are really any questions. Everyone just seems to be super excited, loving the book. We'll just say again, so A Man Who's Not a Man is out now everywhere. You can shop, CassavaRepublic.biz. Yeah, we have our copies. So yeah, we want to see your copies. So yeah, purchase a copy and just post, share online, send your review, send a tweet, send a carrier pigeon at this point because we're going to be locked in our houses forever. Let Thando know how you're reading the book. If you've read the the earlier version, we want to hear how you reading the new version feels in comparison. And just, let us know how you're feeling about A Man Who's Not a Man. And we just can't wait to see how you respond to it. And we're holding Thando to this. We're going to host a book club sometime, maybe March, April, when everyone's had a chance to get it. And we can just, delve a little further into the book and pull out some of the amazing, amazing things in the book. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, Thando. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Maybe a last word, to thank everyone who's here. I mean, I can see my people are here. Hey, Sarah. Hey, Pumbla.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, amazing, James. I can see everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. And I want to just send out a word of warning. Anyone who has bought A Man Who Is Not a Man has told the same story. They lose their copies. Like this is one of those books that just goes, because once a person takes it, they don't want to return it. It's one of those wandering books. So buying 2 copies is not extravagance, is probably self-preservation, is self-love. And for those who have the older versions, I think it's just fantastic to have, different editions of the book. I mean, I do that all the time with other authors' books. So, if you have an older copy, this is still a thing for you. We've done a few edits as well, which I was excited about, that I didn't even think were possible when we were working on it with Bibi, but it improved the book as well. So it's here, and buy it, because I can promise you, you're probably gonna lose it at some point.
Oh, I see some people saying, yeah, so buy 2 copies, definitely the energy. Buy one for guests that come to the house and keep one in your inner sanctum of books, get them as gifts for your friends and steal your copy. That's a good way to go, Wasabi. I love that. I think we have one question. Would we want this book turned into a movie at all? Is a question someone's thrown in there. So Smart Book Club.
And I've been thinking about that. I think we need to wait a little bit and let Ingleba the Wound to have its lifetime, because there was this confusion that it may be an adaptation. But I mean, if you read the book and you watch the movie, there's no connection. But I think definitely, I think the book is visual enough. And also because it's not just about circumcision, it's about life. We would like to see Lumkile with his friends breaking into cars in Cape Town, attending school. We would like to see this love connection with Yanda. I think the landscapes, the mountains that he talks about, the rain, I think those visuals are really just amazing and ripe for adaptation into a film. I don't know if it is going to be me who does it, But I think there has to be time between, the film that came out in 2018 that I wrote, which is also about traditional male circumcision, and this one. Um, I think it's two different stories. There is space for both.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something vibrant about the spaces in A Man Who's Not a Man, and it would be fantastic to see that on TV someday. I think we have BB's in the chat saying hello and thank you.
Thank you, baby.
Yeah, thank you so much everyone for joining. I think it's probably quite late where you are now. Probably what 10:30.
So here's BB saying, don't just buy it, review it, spread the word. If you're a journalist or blogger, bookstagrammer, help us to make this book travel in the world. Thank you very much. Yes, please do that. And if you happen to be a publisher in another country, in another language, this is the book to translate as well.
Yes, I wanna see this in Dutch. I think Abisse somewhere in this chat. Wink, wink. Let's see this. Yeah, really go out there in different languages because it does resonate with so many different communities, and it's a story that should be shared in as many languages as possible so that we have readers everywhere. But it's been great chatting to you. This
Oh,
has been
thank you so
wonderful.
much.
Hopefully, there's a world where we don't have COVID and we can do this in person.
Yes.
And that happens sooner rather than later.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you to everyone.
Thank you. All right, everyone, good night. And look forward to seeing your responses on social media and in private messages to A Man Who's Not a Man. Thanks for joining this conversation and hopefully see you again soon. Good night.
Bye.
Let's do a final. Get your copy. Ooh. Thank you, everyone.